And this is how we sort of take notes, because people are saying all sorts of random stuff to us, and we have to like figure out how it's all interconnected, right? So you can imagine that this is sort of the skeleton behind each one of the graphics, where it's this bubble map, we call them mind maps, of how all these different issues interconnect. And so we have big conversations alongside people while we're gathering the information, but then with each other about how to lay all this stuff out on one piece of paper. And so once we figure out all the concepts and what we're going to try to pull off with the scope of the graphic, then each one of these things becomes a metaphor, and we do lots of metaphor push-ups together that take sometimes months or years in the case of some of our latest posters, and then we pick appropriate characters to play out those metaphors and look up the right species and all these things to get it all straight. And so once we figure out that stuff, then we get to the challenge of trying to fit it all on one piece of paper, because it's like a comic book, but you're seeing all of it at once. And so to do that, we have to choreograph all these little tiny pieces of tracing paper and lots of different sketches that we're all pulling off together. And once we get done with all the pencil work and the line work, then we set to doing the whole thing in pen and ink. And this is another lost art, because it's very tedious and time-consuming to be drawing all of this stuff only in black and white and lines and dots. And a lot of people ask us how the images come together so cohesively as an aesthetic. Like, it looks like one person did it, but it's obviously way more people than that. It's because that medium is super rigid, and that it is all just lines and dots in black and white, and also because our collaboration process is lots of different skills all over, like layered up on top of each other. So some people work on the plants, some people work on the robots, some people just help with the perspective and the math, some people are just a random snail species geek in Nova Scotia that we call randomly in the middle of the night when we have a question. There's all sorts of things that all come together to make the posters happen. And so this is a little bit of the timeline of the posters and the evolution. The first two, actually they came out in 2000, were about biotechnology. And so the first one was this critique of genetically engineered corns, of negative effects on the caterpillars of the monarch butterflies. And this was an event poster for an event that was happening in Boston at the time, right after the big protests in Seattle later that spring. And the other biotech one was sort of zooming out to talk about the homogenization of our culture and monoculture and how that's affecting all these different aspects of our lives. And this is the last time that you'll see us draw a human and use words. And we're going to get into that more in a minute. But so then we started working on a trilogy about globalization in the Americas. And this is when we started to play more with animal metaphors and talking about hard, overwhelming truths in terms of fables, and like really incorporating more images of the natural world into what we were doing and dropping out the humans and the words as much as possible. So can anybody guess, there's a whole bunch of answers to this, and it gets really woo if you wanted to, why you wouldn't want to draw pictures of humans? Like, why did we just segue away from that? Can anybody guess?
It could be potentially controversial depending on how they're depicted.
For sure. Yeah, what else?
That's where the eye would focus.
What?
That's where the eye would focus.
That's where the eye would focus.
Well, I was thinking that you put a picture of an individual human being in there as opposed to the corporation or the oligarchy. So you use the symbolism to depict the power structures and not the individual.
Right. For real. Yep. What else?
Hey, you can sit on me.
Oh, come on, y'all.
Ah.
So, another thing is, like, maybe human beings are pretty narcissistic in the way that we just see the world through the lens of humans all the time, right? And so this is sort of an ambush to, like, get us to get over ourselves for a second here and not just think of things in terms of humans, and that one's me, and that's everybody else, and here's what the humans are doing to each other, and like get lost in that kind of stuff. Like, this brings in the whole other element of talking about, for sure, like the power structures, the symbols, the systematic things that are happening, as well as all the level of ecosystem destruction that's happening. And so, yeah, this is when we started getting into playing with that, and of course leaving out the words as much as possible, because we were figuring out that we were making this tool that could function across boundaries of language and learning. A lot of people were excited about coloring the posters, and there were all ages of people using them in different ways. And so the next round of going at it with the graphic, we decided to make this poster about Plan Colombia, so talking about U.S. foreign policy, how it plays out in South America in terms of the drug war, and being able to talk about globalization through the lens of like a specific place in the Western Hemisphere and sort of zoom out from there. And so we talk about colonization all the way into like specific details of how colonization and capitalism have affected people's individual lives. And since 2002, people all over the place have been using this poster to tell the story of what's going on, maybe where they are, through the lens of talking about Plan Colombia. And so to make that poster, we started our new adventure of trying to get the story straight by, to make that one, a few of us went to Ecuador and Colombia and made that poster with people there. And so everything in it is all request or edit of people we spoke with from the region about how to tell that story. And so that's when we started figuring out that that's really what we needed to do to get this stuff right and to get to be most responsible to the people whose story it is. And so since then, we've been working on the third poster that we call Mesoamerica Resiste. It's about something called Plan Puebla Panama, which is this mega development project that literally seeks to pave the way for globalization and resource extraction throughout Central America and southern Mexico. And when a team of 10 of us went for 5 months all throughout this region collecting stories and figuring out how to tell the story, many people we spoke with say that they consider the PPP, Plan Puebla Panama, to be a cultural and ecological death sentence for this place in the world that's been in the way for the past 500 years of trade. And so we were also on this adventure of trying to figure out how to not just tell the bad news and to try to tell the good news as much or twice as much. And so how this poster works is it folds out, and by the way, we've been working on this for 5 years now. It's sort of the mega project for the collective, and we've been inking it for the past 2 years. The poster on the outside, it's all going to look like an old map and be this kind of trick where you see symbols of 500 years ago as well as what's going on today, all in this old map style. And then you open the poster and the inside is twice as big, and it's all a scene at the base of a ceiba tree, the Mayan tree of life, that is all in the rainforest, and there's 400 species of animals in this poster, and they're all being drawn specifically from photographs. Every ant is different this time around, and the reason that we're trying to do that is so that we can make a map of how the ecology and the economics, which often get talked about separately, of this region can all be seen simultaneously, and people can talk about how those things are connected. So this is the drawing table. There's a few of us at this point. People have been dropping like flies from the project, and there's a few of us working away trying to fill in this mural-sized thing with little tiny dots and lines. And hopefully we'll get it done this year. Wish us luck. Try not to go crazy. So any questions at this point? Cool. All right. So we've also been figuring out how to tell stories with these things and how they get used. Because once we started drawing really complicated posters, then all of a sudden we're trying to explain what's going on in them, and then the next thing you know, we're telling an audience what's going on, and the next thing you know, the audience is telling us, and it kept growing and being the snowball of all this information. And so we've been figuring out how to hone our different sort of teaching methods for using the posters. And so there's all different ways that the banners are out in the world being used. We take them to high schools, and a lot of teachers are using them in their classrooms with different sorts of projects for kids to dissect them and learn about the different pieces in the posters. We go to the the Common Ground Fair in Maine. It's a big country fair, and have all the banners on display. We have a huge amount of support statewide in Maine for what we're doing.